Or
And if you have questions, if you could please write your questions in the chat, and then we will respond to questions at the end. I think it would work better that way.
sure.
Yeah.
Or if we see them in the chat and they relate to what we're talking about, and try and reference them as we're talking.
Right. Jen wanted to remind us. Oh, good. She put in the chat.
Oh.
Jen put in the website for packname.org.
I think I said .com, so thanks, Jen, for correcting me.
Great. So you can keep up to date with all the latest that's going on with name. So, ready?
Sure, go for it.
Okay, cool. Joe and I went on a really long kayak trip this past summer, and I didn't really know what to expect when we started, but it turned out to be absolutely spectacular. A little bit of that. I worked as a sea kayak guide in the San Juan Islands of the Salish Sea, the area that's north of Seattle. I worked there back in my 20s and got into sea kayaking and absolutely fell in love with it, had a great time. And then we've been doing it ever since. When Joe and I got together, she got me to scuba diving, I got her to sea kayaking. And I've been wanting to write a book about my time as a kayak guide for a very long time. And thankfully, my job as a community college instructor at Highline College affords me the ability to take a sabbatical every 5 to 7 years or so. So I applied for a sabbatical to work on my book, and it got accepted. And so our plan was to live at Friday Harbor for a couple months in fall of 2020, and which we did. But the plan was, before we moved to Friday Harbor, we were going to do a kayak trip, and mostly just to get me in sort of the mindset of kayaking again, to help me writing the book. And then COVID hit, and things, all sorts of things changed. I'll change the slide. Okay.
So our original idea, what did you want to tell them? Our original idea was from San Island north on the inside passage, basically, and see how far up we could get.
Yeah, we were going to leave basically probably from somewhere over here, Anacortes area, and you go through the islands for a bit and then continue up to the Gulf Islands and farther up the inside passage, not all the way to Alaska. But then when COVID hit and the Canadians closed the border, we realized that wasn't going to be a possibility. So we were, I don't know, we were planning on leaving August 1st, and it was like beginning of June. And one of us just said, well, what if we just paddled from West Seattle, our house, our home down here, all the way to the San Juans? And we thought, well, that's kind of cool.
Yeah, so that's what we did. There we go. So we kind of broke our trip into 3 sections. The first section was getting to the San Juans. So we left from our home in West Seattle. Can you guys see my arrow? I think you can. So right down here, southwest Seattle by Lincoln Park, we left from a little park called Lowman Beach. There's a bunch of our friends that came out to socially distance send us off, which was wonderful. And we headed north of Seattle. We went across to Blake Island. We were at a Bainbridge State Park. We're at Meadowbrook, Meadowdale. What was the point on South 50? Possession Point, Langley, up here at Camino Island State Park. Yeah, so then we made our way up through Skagit Island here and through Deception Pass, which was amazing.
For those of you who don't know, Deception Pass, it gets really strong currents. And so you have to time when you're going through the pass so that you can make it through. And we actually timed the first part of the trip, the first 12 days really, around going through Deception Pass. And it was great. It was really, it was wonderful. And it was
like a lake. It was totally flat. We timed it so well.
Yeah, probably a little too well.
We sort of wanted it to be more exciting, but it was fine.
It was great. It was great. And then from there, we took a little rest day in Anacortes, which is up here, hung out at Washington Park with my sister and her husband and our little baby. We camped out, socially distanced, of course, and got some resupplies before heading into the San Juans. And when people asked earlier in the trip, where are you going? What's the goal? I said, we're heading to Susha. And Susha is this island up here. It's this northern island in the San Juan archipelago. And I wanted to go to Susha because I'd never been there. I've heard amazing things about it. When I was a guide, we spent most of our time over here, and it was really hard to get. So anyway, that was the goal, was to get to Susha. And that's what we did. We kind of cruised up here through Cyprus, Clark, and made our way to Susha. These are called the Outer Islands. And then we came down here to Orcas and stayed with our friends, Amy and Case, who have a place in East Sound. Sorry, hold that for a second. They've got a place in East Sound, and we resupplied with them down there before sort of doing this big loopy figure 8 thing around all of the islands. Went up to Stewart, on the west side of San Juan Island, through Cattle Pass, twice south into Lopez, into James, and then back over here to the mainland.
And then the last section, so the first section was 12 days. The middle section in the San Juans was about 3 weeks. And then our last kind of just heading home was going to be a week as well, but ended up getting shortened to just about 4 days because the smoke moved in at the end of our trip. But we decided, since on the way up, we had gone on the inside of Whidbey Island, between Whidbey and Camano, and then up through Deception Pass. We decided on our route on the way home, we would go on the outside of Whidbey Island to Port Townsend. So here, this actually along the outside here of Whidbey was our longest day ever. We did 22 miles and ended up at Fort Casey, which is a great park, but we were up all night because the fighter jets would not stop roaring over our heads. So we didn't get much sleep that night and we're exhausted from our long day. Mm-hmm. But it was really beautiful going along this outside edge of Whidbey Island. And then we made it past Port Townsend.
Saw my parents.
Your parents came and visited us for lunch at Port Townsend and down to some campgrounds here. We had planned to go down to the south end of Hood Canal and then end the trip there where my sister has a cabin, but ended up just south of Hood Canal at
Kitsap Memorial.
Kitsap Memorial Park was where we got stuck by the smoke. And that last day, actually paddling to Kitsap Memorial was very smoky and we had to wear our masks, and the next day was worse. So that's when we called it.
Yeah, and it really only shortened the trip by about 3 days. And it had been such a spectacular trip. It was all good. It was unfortunate, but it was all good.
Yeah. So when we were thinking about how to frame this talk and share our ideas and our plans with you and what had happened during the talk, we kind of just came back to questions that people had asked us along the way. And whenever we would stop and we'd pull up and we'd be unpacking our boats, we always had people coming and asking us questions and talking with us, which was really cool. And so some of those questions were, how do you plan for this? How do you pack? What do you eat? Is it scary? How do you go to the bathroom? Do you see a lot of wildlife? And of course, what is your favorite part of the trip? And so we're just going to kind of rip through these slides, going through some of those questions. And again, if you have additional questions, put them in the chat and we will try and get to them. If we see them while we're talking, we'll address them right away, but otherwise we'll just go to the chat at the end and we can answer some questions. So.
All right. So how do you plan a trip like this? On a certain level, it's sort of like planning any long trip where you have your gear,
My
your
daughter is just
supplies, that kind of thing. But there's some really specific things you have to be aware of when you're doing a kayak trip in the Salish Sea. And the big one are the currents. So around here, for those who don't live in the area, we've got big tides, like a 14-foot tide. Not as big as you Alaskans, but still pretty big. And big enough that when that water moves between islands or bodies of land that are close together, it makes some really big currents. So big, in fact, that you can't paddle against them. We paddle at about 3 miles an hour or so. Currents in some places, like Deception Pass, can get over like 7, which is, and even like a 1 knot current is nothing you want to push against if you don't have to.
Yeah, in general, we were paddling about 2 to 3 knots an hour, which is really about the same speed that you walk if you were backpacking or hiking. So if you're going against a 1 knot current, that's cutting your speed in half and making your day twice as long, which you don't want. But if you can catch a current that's 1 or 2 knots, it helps you get much further, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, so we did a lot of our route planning around the currents, particularly when we were in the San Juan Islands. Puget Sound is not as big of a deal. Then, of course, there's weather. And so we would always be checking the weather forecasts a few days out to determine where we wanted to go. For example, we got kind of lucky in that we had planned to be at Susha right about the same time as there was a forecast of a small craft warning, which is when basically small craft like kayaks, for example, should not be on the water. So we got to Susha Island and we hunkered down for a couple of days while the wind blew and it rained for a while. And it was good. I do have to say that if you are thinking about a trip like this, doing it in August and early September is a great time of year because typically the weather's is pretty good for that.
Yeah. So I mean, we had our basic plan set out, a week or two in advance, but then you're always listening to the radio for the forecast that morning, the night before, and as you're going along.
And we didn't really know.
Sometimes things change.
Yeah, we didn't even know how we were going to end the trip. It wasn't until about a week before that because for a while we were thinking, oh, we'll just end up in East Sound and then fly home, and then we're like, no, it'll be nice to paddle, and so we decided to go down to Hood Canal.
All right, so in the chat. Okay, so what do you pack? Basically, we were camping for 6 weeks. So you bring your basic camping gear, your tent and your sleeping pads and your sleeping bags, your cook gear. So it's a little different than backpacking because you're putting everything into a boat, which is carrying most of the weight. So you can bring some nicer things like binoculars and
a ukulele.
As you can see, Woody brought his ukulele. Yeah. So we brought some things that were just, books for reading and pleasure to enjoy, but also the basics of camping. And it adds up when you're going to be gone for 6 weeks and you have to have food. Generally, we had like dry food for 2 to 3 weeks and fresh food we would restock on a weekly, maybe week to 2 week basis. We would try and go to town and restock the fresh food. But you can see in that bottom picture, that is our IKEA bags filled with all of our dry bags, filled with all of our things. So things like your sleeping bag, your tent, your clothes that you really don't want to get wet. You pack them inside of a dry bag, and then that dry bag goes inside of the boat. So that if you were to tip and water gets in the boat, you still have your things in a dry bag and they stay dry. But trying to organize it all, you can see me in the backyard of our house. I was labeling and sorting and organizing for weeks before we left so that we would know like where things were in what bags, in what section of the boat. So you don't have to pull the whole boat apart, which still would happen quite a bit, but to find things, but it got more easy over time to find where we were storing things and where they would go.
And we did have some resupplies along the way. So we sent boxes to friends like Case Namey and Orcas and my sister and Ryan at Anacortes. And we would also give people stuff, because we realized we really don't need it. We had this little table that we thought, this is going to be perfect. We never used it because almost every place we camped at had a picnic table.
Yeah, totally. And then how does it all fit? People always were amazed when they would see us packing or unpacking. So we made a little video in fast time, whatever you call it, time lapse, to show you how it all fits.
It took us about an hour to pack the boats each day. It was a lot of stuff. We probably could have gotten by with less, but for one thing, we really love fresh food. And for another, we liked our luxuries, and it was good. Yeah.
So food and cooking. So Woody really is the more, I feel like we're a little more even keeled now in terms of our skills on kayaking, but mostly Woody's a better kayaker than I am. And he was doing more of the current planning and making sure we had all the safety gear and all of that. So
I fixed your boat. That's the
and
big thing.
and Woody did a lot of fixes on my boat, and yeah, so I kind of fell into like, okay, how else can I help? And so I organized a lot of our meals, which was a ton of fun trying to come up with different and new ideas so that we wouldn't be always eating exactly the same thing. And like I said, you can bring more in the boats than you can when you're backpacking. So we did bring a lot of dehydrated foods and just noodles and rice and pre-made dehydrated soups and things that could be could be used as meals and were lightweight and were in the boats all the time. But then we also would bring fresh food. And the biggest thing that we experimented with on this trip, which was a ton of fun, was a Dutch oven. Where did that yellow line come
I
from?
have no idea where that came from.
Okay. So on the left-hand side, you can see I cooked some lasagna and I cooked some falafel. And on the right, I'm cooking pizza. And that was all in the Dutch oven. So we had our traditional backpacking stove with us. If we couldn't make a fire, if there was a fire ban, or if there was no wood around at the campsites, we would use that to cook our dinners. But if we had more time, we could collect wood and there wasn't a fire ban. We used the Dutch oven most of the time.
Kayaking around the sand.
It really was nice to have that as an option and brought in some new foods that we could eat on our trip.
Yeah, the Dutch oven was great. The Dutch oven was really wonderful. Being able to have nice, tasty, nutritious meals on a trip like this is pretty special. All right, where are we next? There we go. Cool. Is it scary? Not really. I think in part you don't do a trip like this if you're really worried about it. There's always some risk to any adventure, but we were pretty experienced, and I've been paddling in these waters for almost 20 years. What?
Yeah.
So the big thing that you want to do is make sure that you're prepared for when things go wrong. And what many people don't realize is the water in Puget Sound is really cold. So cold that if you end up floating in it without any kind of protective gear on, you can get hypothermic within 15, 20 minutes or so. So we practiced rescues, how to rescue each other, rescue ourselves in case we did tip over. And as I mentioned before, in the islands, there are these currents that just rip around these islands, and they oftentimes form these what are called tide rips, which are like white water in the ocean itself. And you can see here in the upper left-hand corner, there's a photo we took. I'm not sure you can tell, but that's a mast of a sunken sailboat. And there are these really big tide rips around this point here. This is the north end of Patos Island, north of Susha. So we were paddling along, and we had to fight a bunch of rips to get to this point.
And there was like a little beach before this rocky outcrop, and we're like, let's pull over here. And when we pulled over to take a look, we got out of the boats and we're like, oh boy, okay, how are we not going to end up where that sailboat is?
Yeah.
Which is where all the water was pulling kind of right to that spot.
So it's kind of cool. You can almost make out here, there's this big rock here, and before it, there's a little stream of water. And we're standing over here looking at the stream of water, and there are these ducks, these diving ducks, golden eyes or something, just diving, playing in it, which is really cool. But we didn't know how shallow it was. And all of a sudden we saw a seal just dip its head underwater and swim underneath. And we realized, well, if a seal could go through, we could too in our kayak. So we ran that one. It was fun. It was great. So currents, rips are something to be aware of. Other boats like big freighters, they're absolutely enormous. Most people don't know this, but it's like the Space Needle or the Columbia Tower put on its side, traveling at 30 miles an hour. They're absolutely massive things out there. You want to stay away from those, and usually it's pretty easy to do that, except when there is fog. And we encountered this on several days of the trip. You can see down here, this is a Washington State ferry coming out of this thick, thick fog, this marine layer. And there were a few mornings where we chose to stay on the beach for an extra hour or so, just so the fog would burn off, so that we could see where we're going. We don't use radar, and the thing too is we don't actually show up on radar either. If the big boats are using radar, they wouldn't even pick up our little plastic kayaks. So I always carried a VHF radio, and would even call into what they call traffic control in Seattle. And like when we made big crossings, we were crossing from Anacortes over to Cyprus. I called in and said 2 kayaks crossing from Anacortes to Cyprus. And they actually put the call out to the other boats and let us know that there would be a couple ferries coming along. And I carried an air horn, which for the fog, yeah, which is pretty cool. Though I didn't get to use it as much as I wanted to.
That was a good thing.
That was a good thing. Yeah, yeah. And we each brought dry suits with us, and for particularly long days where there was a risk of capsizing or going in the water, or if it was big crossings, or if there were really kind of rough conditions ahead or that sort of thing, we wore the dry suits. Neither of us capsized or fell in the waters. That was fine. The other thing to be concerned about was, of course, COVID. And we ended up, this was a far more social trip than either of us expected.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think anybody who had a boat or had ever thought of owning a boat decided to get a boat and get on the water this summer.
It was.
Somebody's asking, I'm looking in the chat here about some things here. Somebody's asking about the Pelican boats. Yeah, these are Pelican boats. That's Pelican Beach
On Cypress
Cypress Island. And we happened to be there the weekend of the birthday of Fred Smith,
original builder
of the Pelican fleet
Yeah.
here in the Northwest. And Fred was there 92 years old. Pretty cool. And at the age of 90, he actually hiked up to Eagle Bluff. Yeah, we met some really neat people. And the boats look really cool. They look great for putzing around the sound. One of the things we talked about was maybe the next time we do this trip, we have something a little bit bigger than kayaks to do it in, so we can carry more food and have a different place to sleep at night. Cool.
Great.
All right. Next up.
Yeah. All right, so this is a funny question, but we did get it a lot. So I thought maybe other people want to know too. How did you go to the bathroom? So we tried to really not be in the boats for longer than like an hour and a half or 2 hours at a time. And so that really gave us the chance to, like, every hour or 2 hours, get out, find a little beach where we could pull out our boats, we could stretch our legs, go to the bathroom and have a little snack, and then we get back in the boats. When you're wearing a dry suit, there are zippers to allow you to go to the bathroom. So that's a picture of the back of my dry suit, which has a big zipper I unzip, and then I can squat and go to the bathroom like normal. Woody's dry suit has a zipper in the front, and so he is easy to go to the bathroom when he's on shore, but also he was pretty talented at going in his boat as well, using a bottle. So he didn't have to necessarily wait until we got to the beach if he didn't want to.
Yeah, it wasn't a fun, pleasurable thing to do, but in an emergency, in a pinch, it was quite helpful. We did one really big crossing from Stewart Island down to Henry, and we were in the water for like 3 hours or something, and that bottle definitely came in handy. All right. Next one.
All right.
Trying to. It takes practice, Jacob. Yes, it does.
Did you see a lot of wildlife? Yeah, it wasn't, we've done some trips in Alaska and trips in British Columbia, Vancouver Island. where maybe we saw more like big whales and humpbacks, but on this trip, every day we saw harbor seals, blue herons, and there was always some really wonderful encounter with wildlife every day. So on this slide, on the left-hand side, it's a little bit hard to see, but we were just leaving Blake Island right off of Seattle, and I looked down, and in the sand underneath the boat were just all these beautiful aggregating anemones, completely open and feeding, and so pink and green and vibrant and gorgeous. Later, I think it was a couple days later, I had a really fun encounter with a river otter who popped up really close to my boat, saw me, got kind of spooked and like dipped down underwater, but he kept going the same direction that I was going. So I just kept paddling, and then he'd pop up again and he'd look at me and he'd be like, you're still there. And he'd drop down and he'd keep going, but he kept going the same direction and I was going that way too. So I wasn't really trying to follow him, but I did. And after about 4 or 5 pops, he eventually realized he has to go down and turn around if he's going to get rid of me. And that's what he did. But it was really fun.
Lots and lots of harbor seals. They were very common, particularly in the San Juans, and harbor porpoises, which are, I began to think of them as our guardian angels, because we saw them about almost every day. And if you know what harbor porpoises are like, they're very mysterious. They make almost no sound whatsoever, and they just sort of pop up. You see this little dorsal fin just roll up out of the water, often 100 yards away or something, just kind of roll up a couple times, and then that's it.
Very far away,
Very
usually,
far
because
away,
they're pretty shy.
Yeah, very skittish. And so I always felt like they were sort of checking in on us. Yeah, it was kind of cool.
Yeah.
And then we saw some
Bigger guys. This slide is the stellar sea lions.
Yeah, stellar sea lions. So this is south of their breeding grounds. They breed farther up north in Alaska and further in BC. But the males come down here in the summer and hang out, and it's like they're like a bunch of frat boys just making a ton of noise, and they smell really bad, and they're Anyway, there are a couple different spots where they like to hang out. The one photo you see up here, this is north of Susha, and then there's another island called Whale Island down outside of Cattle Pass. And they're big. They're absolutely massive. They're actually bigger than grizzly bears and just as territorial and mean. And one day when we were paddling, this is actually on the way from Anacortes to Cyprus, Giovannina got followed by one, which was a little bit too close, I think.
Yeah, it was a ton of fun, but at the very beginning, I was sort of startled. This guy back here who's behind me in the picture came up sort of right alongside me as I was paddling and just sort of bopped his head up. And literally, I felt like his face was like eye to eye right next to me. And I almost flipped my kayak and was just like, oh my God, what was that? And I was like, Woody! But, and it was the opposite of the river otter, where the river otter was like scared of me, but I kept going and he finally turned around. This one was like, all right, I'm going to keep going. And the sea lion kept following us, and he just kept bobbing up next to me, and he'd look right at me, and then he'd dive back down and go next to my boat. And it was really fun. But it was also like, oh, if he comes up too close or just bumps me slightly, it was just as long as my boat and could easily have flipped me over if he wanted to.
Yeah.
So a little unnerving, but also beautiful.
And we did see orcas. We saw transient orcas twice. We saw them once on Jones, which I think is what this photo represents down here.
Oh yeah,
right.
You can't see them with the photo.
But we saw them from land. We didn't see them from the kayaks, and we weren't able. They just kind of cruised past us. We didn't have a chance to get a photo of them.
But it was pretty special.
It was pretty special. It felt really great.
It was early in the morning. We were all making breakfast. Amy had, not Amy.
Gretchen
had come out and was camping overnight with us, and we were
Noel
making breakfast, and and they came right by our campsite when we were making breakfast, and so we went running out on the cliff to watch them.
Yeah, then we saw another group at San Juan County Park one evening. It was pretty special. And then we saw some other stuff. So there's the stuff on land, and I know some of the people on this Zoom are pretty familiar with the San Juan Islands. and are familiar with Spiden, which is just a kind of a funky place. And those who know Spiden, it's just this interesting island in the San Juans, from the northern end of the San Juans, and the southern. It's a long island that stretches east to west, and it's got a ridge in the middle of it. And the northern side has kind of a rich, thick forest, but the southern slope is really dry. It's like, looks like African savanna. And somebody must have had the same feeling, because back in the 60s, yeah, the Jonas Brothers, who are not the rock band, but the famous taxidermy duo from Denver, Colorado, bought the island and were going to rename it Safari Island. And they brought in exotic ungulates, things like mouflon sheep and antelope and other interesting things, as a big game hunting reserve where you could go shoot these things. But there was a big outcry and it never happened. And then somebody else bought the island. But the animals are still there, and they've tried to clean them up and take them off the island several times. They've gotten some of them, but there's still just a lot of really weird animals. They're super inbred because it's this tiny little island, and they're anyway. So paddling by Spiden, you see these funny, inbred
like gazelles or
like
antelopes.
It's really
they're not native.
No, and they sometimes swim to the other islands.
That's how the Mouflon sheep got to
Stewart.
Right?
Yeah, a friend of ours who lives on Mouflon, lives on Stewart, he said he's had Mouflon sheep in stew before. The locals will hunt it.
We did also see deer. A lot of the times the deer would be down on the beach, eating the seaweed or licking the salt off the rocks as we would pull up for a little break. And then we did quite a bit of tide pooling. If there was a low tide that corresponded with us being at camp, I love to go out and look at invertebrates. So that was one of my favorite parts, was like having a little bit of downtime just to go check out the tide pools around our campground.
And a lot of birds. I think that's what this,
Lots of birds.
Lots of birds. Great blue herons everywhere, particularly in Puget Sound. As we got further up into the San Juans, more eagles, just because there isn't as much sort of shallow wading area for great blue herons. But there are still great blue herons in the San Juan Islands. Cormorants, this is a bunch of cormorants nesting here on a cliff. I think this is on Henry Island. This is over here, if you can see, this is a big juvenile bald eagle. I thought it was a golden eagle when I first saw it, but unfortunately it wasn't. Tons and tons of ducks.
Oyster catchers.
Lots of kingfishers. So yeah, it was great for birding. It was really wonderful.
We were hoping to see puffins on the south end of Lopez. We had heard that you can sometimes see them, but we didn't find any when we were down there.
And then of course,
raccoons. You have to be really careful when you're camping in the San Juans, anytime really, with food in the Northwest. And so we would hang most of our food, but some of it we would leave in the boats. We had a
system.
We had a system.
And I, like the first night of the trip or something, I know I posted something on Facebook, and Jacob, who I think is in the call right now, was like, look out for those raccoons on Blake. And I was like, I got a system. And we had can straps that we strapped the hatches closed with, and we actually had foam blocks that we put on top of that to really, so it was like, we're good.
Locked our kayaks.
Down. But then, over time, we got a little bit lax. That happens. And the raccoons turned out to be a lot more intelligent than we thought. And we were camped out on James Island, and you left a half-eaten granola bar in your PFD.
Yeah. Which is what woke me up, because the raccoons pulled my PFD out of my boat, dragging it up into the forest, and I heard them. Thank goodness I caught them and saw what was happening, grabbed my PFD, and then I realized that I had a half-eaten Cliff Bar or something in my pocket, and that's why they'd gone after it. But then I think that must have tipped them off that there was food.
Well, not just that.
I don't have time. But anyways, they got into our hatches that night, and it was the first time we'd been on the water for over a month camping, and It was the first time raccoons got into the hatches. They basically tore through the straps and then with their fingers pried open the hatch covers that we put over this primary. We had secondary covers over the primary cover, and they were able to peel that up and get at our food. So that night we didn't sleep much. They made a big mess. We
ended up hanging all the
we ended
food.
up hanging all our food in the middle of the night. This other one here, this other picture was a little mouse that chewed through one of our dry bags early on in the trip. So and that was because we'd left the dry bag just out on a picnic table thinking, oh, there was just like dried food in it, nothing really smelly, but you know, they got in. So,
That was somebody was asking about what island was the raccoon. That was James. And so James is right across from Anacortes. It's oftentimes like the first spot that boaters and kayakers.
it's kind of like right in here. You can see my arrow.
Yeah. And so I think the raccoons are quite habituated and
They're
used
very
to
aggressive
humans.
there.
They had no fear whatsoever. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Bear canisters. Yeah, bear canisters.
Yeah, it just takes up more space trying to get a hard canister inside of your kayak's compartment. So,
And I needed room for my ukulele. So
yeah.
and
And we were
avocados
hanging
and-
most of our food, but we had been storing some of the dry food and the canned food inside of the kayak. Yeah. So, of course, everybody always said, what was your favorite part of the trip? I think I can speak for both Woody and I. We really just loved the length of the trip. We have done kayak trips before, but I think our longest kayak before this was a 2-week, like a 14-day trip. And so having a full 6 weeks was just was lovely. Correcting my spelling as we go. And then you're traveling at the speed of your body. So like it's kind of a little annoying sometimes when boats would come flying past us and we knew in 15 minutes they would be at their destination and we still had 4 or 5 more hours to go. But it was also really lovely just to be moving slow, to be absorbing like everything that was around us and at the whim of the weather. And yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
And we had no misgivings about the purpose of this trip. We weren't trying to cover 30, 40 miles in a day or anything like that. We wanted to have a nice time. Or, you know, actually I was teaching a class for the
first bit of it.
First bit of the trip, right? So I would, you know, sometimes in my tent I'd be grading, you know, quizzes and that sort of thing. And we took a lot of breaks. If you look at this
In the
map
beginning,
here,
yeah.
you can see there's a gap between Possession Point and Langley. We got to Possession Point, and then there was a nasty weather day, and we were planning on meeting Giovannina's parents for a little Airbnb here, which we did. We stayed at, enjoyed Langley, and then we just got dropped off.
We had them drop us off further north.
Yeah, and then up here, outside of Oak Harbor, we stayed at another Airbnb with a hot tub, which was really wonderful,
And a shower.
And a shower. That was great. And the guy, it was a horse farm. The guy had this big truck and he was able to anyway, carry all of our gear for us. And he's talking to us, and he said, where are you going to next? We're going to Skagit Island, then we're going to go through Deception Pass. He said, I can take you to Deception Pass.
It's only 20 minutes
It's a
away.
20-minute drive. And
2 days for us.
it's about 2 days. We're going to take about 2 days to get there. But that was the beauty of the trip, right? It was going slow and really observing everything we could along the way. And it was really, it's just a whole other mode of existence and a different way of living. And I think particularly given the pandemic and the lockdowns and everything, it was really great to be able to get out and get back in our bodies and be in nature every day. That was really special.
Yeah. I think these slides here, we have on the far left some pictures of when we were exploring on Susha Island. The geology on Susha is just beautiful. Just amazing rock formations. There's a lot of fossils in the rocks. and tons of tide pooling that we did on a couple of our days. We hiked over 12 miles around the island. It's just a really unique island, so it was a special place to be. This picture here, Woody and I hiked, that was on Cypress Island. We hiked up to a mountain lake that I think was called Mountain Lake on the top of Cypress Island. And we went swimming. It was unbelievable. Like I can't express how it feels when you're covered in like 7 days of salt and sweat and you jump into a freshwater lake in the islands. It was like, oh my gosh, amazing.
That's
So
pretty great.
that was pretty good, cool. Oh, tide pooling, I mentioned earlier. I love tide pooling. I really enjoy the invertebrates and the small wildlife that hides in the tide pools. So that was me tide pooling.
Yeah, and then also seeing people on the trip. We were very fortunate to meet up with family and friends along the way, and that was really special to be able to share it with other people. And then, of course, just being able to work with Giovannina. We've done a lot of trips together, but nothing like this. And that was great. That we were a great team. It was a wonderful time.
That was fun.
Yeah, and I did a lot of blogging about it. Just not your Canadian friends. Yeah, I know.
Sorry. Looking at the questions. Yeah, so Woody blogged. He wrote about it the whole time. Woody's working on writing a book about kind of kayaking and his life, and so the blog was sort of his notes to keep track of what we were doing every day and share with family and friends, but also will be a piece of the end product of his book that he's working on. So if you want to know more about our trip, there's more detail, much more detail.
Yeah, you can check out that.
At Woody's webpage, his blog is called The Kayak Chronicles on 3 Gems.
PNW.com. You can search for Kayak Chronicles. Yeah, awesome. Well,
if there's any questions in the chat, we're going to look at those. And then I think, can you raise your hand in Zoom?
I think so.
If you guys want to raise your hand, you could. I don't know if that's an option in Zoom.
Yeah, so I'm going back here through some of the questions. Besides the table, what else did you not need? Well,
I brought my yoga mat. I thought, it'll be nice. I'll do yoga in the morning. And that was quickly thrown out because I could just do yoga on the ground or use my thermarest and I didn't do that much yoga.
I should have left my fishing pole at home. We had one good day. I had one good day of fishing at Possession Point, actually. And other than that, though I did go out fishing with Casey and Amy on their boat. That was really cool. But I did a lot of fishing and zero catching, so I could have left that one at home. What kind of kayaks are they good for sea and freshwater? We've got Wilderness Systems Tempest kayaks. They're both plastic, rotomolded plastic kayaks. They're sort of they're like the Honda Civic of kayaks. It's a very popular, common, relatively inexpensive sea kayak. And you can use them, in saltwater, freshwater. We like having plastic kayaks because you really don't worry about beating them up. You can run them into rocks or on beaches and stuff, but they are heavy. They're heavy. And the plastic also gets deformed and scraped, and so they're slow.
We had discussions about this while we were on the trip of like, halfway through, we're like, should we just like go into Friday Harbor and try and trade our boats out for some fiberglass boats and we can go twice as far?
It was all good.
But we just liked going slow and
and there were the boats that we had, and it was all good. When is the book coming out? I don't know. I don't know. We'll see. It's probably going to take a couple of years, honestly, but I've been writing away. I've been plugging away at that, and I'm now actually writing about my time as a sea kayak guide back in the early 2000s. So like Jeff Carter, we need to talk. I gotta run some things past you about that. Speaking of Jeff, he asks, what kind of Dutch oven? Aluminum, cast iron? Aluminum. Yeah, GSI makes this great Dutch oven that doesn't have any feet on it, and we were able to slide it up in front of.
Most of the time it was up in front of my feet. Like I would have one dromedary of water. Oh, we forgot to talk about water.
Oh, water's a big one. Yeah.
That was a
that was a real limiting
that was
factor.
a limiting factor in the islands because we really liked going to islands that were not developed and had more wilderness campgrounds, but then they wouldn't have water. So we had 2 5-gallon dromedaries of water that we carried with us, and we stuck them in front of our feet, down like way down in the front by our feet. And so on top of my dromedary of water, I could also fit the Dutch oven. And it slid in there pretty nicely.
Jeff,
But you also want to bring, if you're doing a Dutch oven, you want like a good pair of leather gloves for like and some tongs.
Yep.
For like grabbing it, because it's just right over the fire.
Yeah, you make some
or
good
over
coals.
the coals.
Yeah, so you need that. But it was nice. It was really nice. Jeff also asked, did you feel connected to the rhythm of the tides? Absolutely. Yeah, it just sort of gets in your bones. Jeff knows this from paddling in the San Juans, but you just sort of get this sense. And it's the tides and the moon as well. Like you're always watching the moon. And the reason for that, and I teach this in my oceanography and marine biology classes, is that the cycle of the moon has a huge impact on the tides and how big the tides are. You know, so if it's a new moon or a full moon, that means you're gonna have big currents and big tides. And that's the kind of thing, you know, you're kind of paying attention to when you decide where to put your boat at night or what route you're going to take. And it just sort of gets in, it just sort of gets in your system. It's really cool. It's sort of like being, you know, awakened by the sunrise. It's pretty neat.
Some days though too, that we'd like start out and be totally with the tides and then stop for lunch, and we thought we still had another hour or two to get to our campground, but when we get back on the water, we'd be like, hey, what happened? All of a sudden the current's going the opposite way or not with us quite as much as we thought it was going to be going. So we always made it to camp, but sometimes it'd be a little later. We had some days that we flew to camp because we caught it so nicely.
Yeah, it worked out really well. Something I'd love to hear some of the things you learned during the trip, either learned from a book, but then got to observe, or from your own observations. Anything you want to?
Learned from a book, but then observed. I'm trying to think of like.
I'm thinking of, can I share this one?
Sure.
I'm thinking of, there's this great book that I've been giving it to everybody for the holidays. It's called Living High. And it's about these folks who homesteaded back in the 1920s on this island right here called Sentinel Island off of Spiden. And when I heard that people homesteaded this island, I thought they were absolutely crazy, because this island is surrounded by sheer cliffs on all sides, and Spiden Channel has some of the most ripping currents, if anywhere, in the San Juans. And I knew Spiden from my days of guiding. We paddled past here on our way to Stewart. And to learn about these people who decided to homestead on Spiden, I was like, oh my God, that's totally crazy. Come to find out, they're very, very amazing people. June and Farrar Byrne. I strongly recommend Living High. I'll put it in.
Yeah, the book is called. The book is called Living High. That was fun because you're reading chapters from that book, and just you could picture it because we'd been there, you know.
Yeah. Let's see. Shout out to Jen for the link on packname.org about paralytic shellfish poisoning. I got way deep into writing about paralytic shellfish poisoning, which is, be careful. There's a, read the, you can learn all about that on the thing.
Well, we,
foraging for shellfish now.
Yeah, on the south end of Lopez. South end of Lopez was gorgeous. Here, let me pull up a map, maybe. So this is Lopez Island here, if you can see where my arrows is. And this south end right down here is exposed to a lot of water and currents that are coming in through the Strait of Juan de Fuca from the outer coast. And it was just spectacular. The rock formations, the intertidal life, the mussels were like, they were like 8 inches to a foot big, these giant mussels, and just covering the rocks. And we happened to be going around at kind of a medium to low tide. So I was like, hey, let's get a few of these and cook them up for dinner. But we didn't have internet service at the time to check if they would be safe to eat or not. So we picked, threw them in a bag, threw the bag over the side of the kayak to keep them in the water, and paddled the rest of the way to our campsite. But then when we got to our campsite, we did have service, and we looked it up, and it said there was not healthy to eat them off the south end of Lopez at that time. So we donated them to the Sea Stars that were James Island for dinner that night instead of for us.
Yeah, so we didn't. Yeah, you really
But
want to
yeah,
avoid.
that was the only time we really harvested because we saw so many there. And Woody has a whole blog on like shellfish poisoning, why you don't want to eat it.
You don't want
to.
to.
Not recommendation.
Yeah, it's
recommended.
really bad. Kayak sales. No, we didn't. And and honestly, this time that time of year in the San Juans, there's not a lot of wind typically. It's kind of one of those funny things that sailors will go to the San Juans to sail in the summertime, and they end up motoring everywhere. There isn't a ton of wind. Our boats also don't have rudders on them. They just have skegs. So you have to use the paddle as a rudder, and people do it. It's a little bit tricky. I'm sort of the opinion, if you want to sail, then it'd be nicer to have a bigger boat. But it could be fun. There are certain places, like I think like in Belize would be really great to have a sail on a kayak. What were the trade-offs between taking a double kayak versus 2 singles? Yes. So, so when Joe and I first got together, and I was into kayaking, and I wanted her to get into kayaking, she brought that up. She said, "Well, maybe we should just get a double kayak." And I said, "No." I said, "No, you are definitely getting your own kayak," because I met this woman. She was amazing. I wanted us to be together for the rest of our lives, and I didn't want to ruin it by being stuck in a kayak together. When I used to guide, we called the doubles divorce boats, right? Because fundamentally, the person in back is steering, but has no idea if there's a rock in front of them or not. It's the person in front who can see that, and they see the rock and they start shouting, but the person who's steering is behind them. It could be like an Abbott and Costello thing, right? So in terms of interpersonal communication, it's rough. The other thing, though, is that you actually can fit more in 2 single kayaks than you can in 1 double kayak. So yeah, but a double would have been faster. They're more stable.
And I think this just gave us more independence to go kind of we were traveling together, but if I was, Woody was practicing some songs while we were kayaking, yep. And as he was screaming along, practicing his songs, sometimes I would just route my kayak the other direction.
Remember our song? Ding 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 ding.
Oh.
Ding ding ding. Ding 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 ding.
Ah.
Ding ding ding. So these are the kinds of things you sort of get in the habit of doing. All right. Would we organize a name kayak tour for this summer, just for a day? Yeah, just email me and we'll see. Our summer plans are starting to take shape, but it'd be wonderful to see name folk. It's always great to get on the water. Yeah. My sister asked, what are you most proud of from the journey?
I would say I feel like I really understand. Like I feel like I could go out with a girlfriend now and kayak in the San Juan Islands, whereas when we started this trip, I would not have taken anybody out or gone by myself in those waters because I didn't truly understand all of the currents and what a rip looks like or what it feels like when I enter a rip with my boat and it gets twisted around or pulled over. So I'm very proud that I made it without flipping.
Well, you became a much stronger paddler.
And became a stronger paddler.
Joe became a much stronger paddler. Yeah, you were doing great.
And I want to do more now.
Yeah. That's great. I'm really happy that things went off without any serious problems. It was 300 miles of travel is a long way to go. And it took a lot of planning and communication and luck and skill. We got ourselves into some really hairy conditions at one point. We were able to make it through just fine. It was good. Any night paddles to see bioluminescence?
We did night like walks on the beach and swimming to see bioluminescence, but did we paddle? I don't think we paddled. No, I don't think we
No,
paddled
that
that
was
night.
Laurel
No.
Hammer. We didn't.
Mm-mm.
No, we didn't. And
We have
done that before
on trips. Like one of our trips up in BC, I woke up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom actually, and the bioluminescence was like amazing. So I woke up Woody and was like, "We have to go for a paddle."
That was great. That was up in the Gulf Islands.
Yeah,
that was wonderful. Honestly, I have to say, after spending all day in a kayak, I was like,
we're a little more tired of the kayak this time around,
and wanting to use, the lower. We would do on days off. We do a lot more hiking and that sort of thing. Things when we could.
Yeah.
Just to use the lower, have some more buddies. Separate paddle boards, nice. What else do we have here? Hi, Giovannina and Woody. Thanks for sharing. Be well, old aquarium. Oh, that's so sweet. Holly, did you plan your camp destination every day? You kind of have to. Unlike.
I mean, we had backups. Like we definitely had like, this is where we want to get to today.
Yeah.
But if for some reason wind changes or currents don't agree with us, we might have a backup where we could pull over and camp. But
the other thing is
there's not much in the San Juans.
Well, and then Washington State is kind of a funny place in that a lot of the tidelands, the beaches are private actually. So in Canada, for example, the tidelands, the beaches are public. So you can just pull up on a beach, anywhere you can. Or if you're in a place like, Tofino or something in Clayoquot Sound, you can just camp anywhere you can find it. It's not like that at all in the San Juans. It's actually pretty well developed, and there are, a lot of private homes. And so you got to get to your destination. You got to find a place to camp out. Somebody asked earlier about.
You have to plan out your bathroom breaks too. Well,
on big crossings,
Yeah. Well, and also like sometimes we'd see a beach and we'd get closer to it and we'd be like, oh, that looks like a great place to pull over. But then as you got even closer or just about to pull up, you'd see a house just right there behind the trees. And you'd realize that they have a big picture window looking out at that beach, and that was their private property. And you probably shouldn't land there. So then we'd keep going around the corner and try and find another little spot to pull out. Mm-hmm. We try to be respectful of private property. Sometimes we just had to get out of the boats and stretch our legs or go to the bathroom. And so you would pull up and it would be somebody's house right there, but you try to be discreet and go behind a bush or whatever.
It's not cheating. It's not what Fawn is saying, or Woody cheats.
By going in the bottle.
By going in the bottle. Yeah.
Well, I was just noticing it is after 7:30, and we know we had
respect everyone's time.
Yeah, we had you guys here for an hour, and thank you all so much for coming. If you want to stay on longer and ask us more questions, we'd love to hear from you. We could maybe.
And I am recording. We're recording this.
Okay.
So for folks that weren't able to be here, we can share that with them. I'll post something on Facebook.
I want to thank you guys. You realize you scheduled this during the football playoff, and so I had to choose between. and honestly, I did a dissection once during Super Bowl, and no one showed up. You got to pay attention to the sporting events for a certain segment of your audience. But you won out over the football. I just wanted to let you know that I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
This is college football, right?
Thank you.
Yeah, it's the playoff. It's Alabama versus Ohio.
Oh, wow.
Well, thank you so much, Bill, for coming.
Bill.
Good night, y'all.
Good night.
You all do remember that NAME always has their committee meeting on Super Bowl weekend.
I know, that's just dumb. Bye-bye.
Not this year.
Nice job. Thank you.
Bye, guys. Nice seeing everyone.
Best to Michael.
Oh, yeah, he's over here watching the news. Fun stuff.
Hey, Woody and Giovannina, would you guys mind stopping your screen sharing so that we can see the gallery of who's still on?
Sorry.
You have 30 people. Awesome.
One last time before everybody goes, that Kay will be doing next month, February 8th at 6:30, talking about virtual. So yay, Kay.
Hey, Ryan's there.
Oh, nice. I can see everybody now.
Hey, tell us again what she's talking about. You got noisy right then.
Oh, virtual. Okay, you want to talk about it?
Kay's online.
Sure. So virtual field trips are a way that I reach out to my students, and they're just little, like 3 to 4 minute shorty field trips where I'm doing either aquatic or marine education. And I filmed a bunch of them last spring and the summer, and then I've continued to film some. So
Great. Thanks so much.
um,
Yeah, so
got
virtual.
all of that. My internet spotty.
I think we got you, but
Yeah.
yeah, it was a little clearer when you turned off your video. Does anyone else have questions? Thank you all for being on.
This is wonderful.
So Woody, I was going to ask this. I'm going to be in Hood River for 7 days this summer. I'm doing a 10-day kayaking, 4 days around Mount St. Helens, all the waterways, just out of curiosity, and then 6 days in Hood Canal area. Suggestions? Because we want to see stuff, and we just read the book, I just read the book, The Highest Tide, and that kind of got me going crazy on where to go.
Well, Joe's sister has a place in Hood Canal in Tahuya, which is sort of right, there's this great bend in Hood Canal. It's sort of down by the Great Bend, right across from Hood Sport.
Mm-hmm.
It's beautiful down there. One of the things to do there is forage for oysters. Definitely check for paralytic shellfish poisoning or Vibrio. There's a website, I can send you the link, the Washington State shellfish page. But yeah, there's great foraging there, and yeah, it's a pretty remote area. Hood Canal is surprisingly remote, particularly on the
But is Hood
east.
River the same as?
No, Hood River is down
I
by
should mention again, Hood River.
yeah, Hood River is down by Mount Hood in Oregon, and the person to ask about that is Jacob Sealander, who's sitting right there. Jacob, who grew up right around there and is more of a downwind kayaker. I'm sure Jacob would have some ideas there for paddling in Hood River. Is that right, Jacob?
Gotta unmute myself. Yeah, there's like pretty much any type of paddling you'd like to do in Hood River over the summer, and it's warm water, warm weather, beautiful.
Would Alder Creek be?
No, it's like the air's like I saw something go warm. Like
It's
the
all
water
relative.
in the river is around 70 degrees by mid-July usually, which is